A fierce duel between Anakin and Dooku commences inside Dooku's hideout. They exchange myriad blows, a ballet of saber clashes and expert precision. The room flashes with the agitated blades clang, and the hum of the sabers echoes in the desolate cave. Anakin, even as a Padawan, is able to handle himself toe-to-toe in a lightsaber duel with an experienced Jedi. But alas, Anakin lost the battle and lost his arm in the confrontation. As Dooku escapes from the scene, Anakin is rushed to the first aid station to stabilize his injury, and when he wakes up, the arm severed by Dooku is replaced by a mechanically built limb. He stretches it, trying to feel the familiar tingles on his fingertips, but there is no feedback from the prosthetic. Anakin's face was puzzled at how should he react to this feeling, an empty prosthetic limb. Obi-Wan enters the room to consolidate his Padawan. He reached out from his sleeve and returned Anakin's saber, hoping to return the spark that makes Anakin a fierce warrior. Anakin couldn't help but smirk. When his familiar saber returned to his palm, he could no longer feel the saber speaking to him.
Obi-Wan, I need to get back to training.
Anakin's heart began to race, his hands trembling, trying to find the feeling of the saber.
Anakin, you need to rest.
No, Obi-Wan. I just need to get back in the field.
Calm down, Anakin. Rushing it won't get you back.
Anakin struggles to stand back up. He tries to.
If I'm not out there fighting, I am not a Jedi, then what am I?
In this scenario, Anakin not only lost his arm, but also with his arm amputated by Dooku, he lost all feelings with his saber. What would Anakin his become if he did not have his saber abilities to fight? What would Anakin do to regain his ability on the field? And who may be the right person to guide Anakin in his quest to regain his ability? Stay tuned for this episode of What If. Before we begin, I want to tell you about this episode's sponsor, Fantasy Sabers. Let me tell you, it is a dream for me to own my own lightsabers. Fantasy Saber makes quality lightsaber with customizable parts that really make me feel like a Jedi or Sith if I feel a bit naughty that day. But nonetheless, they are one of the best sabers you can find in the market out there. If you're into cosplaying, they have high-quality replicas, and if you just want to mess around with your buddies, they also have their own takes in lightsabers they come up with themselves. Go check them out in the link in the description to get your own saber and live out your fantasy of being in Star Wars right now. Now, back to the story. The air inside the Jedi Temple's training room was thick with tension. The hum of Anakin Skywalker's mechanical arm echoed through the room as he clashed repeatedly with the training droids. Sweat glistened on his forehead, his brow furrowed in frustration. Each strike with his lightsaber was precise, yet something was missing. His movements, once fluid and instinctive, now felt clumsy and forced. The mechanical arm had altered everything. Anakin gritted his teeth, launching himself into the fray with renewed ferocity. But with every swing, every parry, it felt as though the force was slipping from his grasp. The droids moved in, their mechanical limbs relentless in their precision, and with one mistimed swing, Anakin faltered. A sudden blow knocked the lightsaber from his hand. The hum of his weapon ceased, leaving only silence. He fell to his knees, chest heaving with a mixture of exhaustion and frustration. His saber lay a few feet away, but it might as well have been galaxies apart. The room felt suffocating, as if the weight of the galaxy was pressing down on him. As Anakin knelt, staring at the floor, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber. Slowly, he lifted his head to see Jedi Masters Yoda, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Mace Windu standing in the doorway. Their presence, usually calming and reassuring, now only intensified his turmoil. Mace Windu's stern gaze fell upon him first, his arms crossed.
Your performance is lacking, Skywalker. The Council had high hopes for you, but I question whether you are truly ready.
Anakin's jaw clenched.
I'm fine. I just need more time.
Mace shook his head. Obi-Wan stepped forward, his voice softer, more compassionate.
Anakin, we're concerned for you. This anger, this frustration, it's consuming you. I only want you to heal, to be yourself again.
Anakin averted his gaze, his mechanical hand flexing unconsciously.
I'm not the same. How am I supposed to fight when I can't even feel the lightsaber? Without my blade, I'm nothing.
Yoda, who had been silent, slowly approached Anakin. His wise, ancient eyes studied the young Jedi carefully.
Frustration and fear, I sense. Strong your feelings are.
He paused, his tone softening.
But a Jedi your lightsaber does not make. The Force, it is. Your ally.
Anakin's eyes flickered with uncertainty as Yoda continued, his voice calm and patient.
More than the blade you are. Trust in the Force. You must. It flows through you. Guide you. It will.
The word struck a chord deep within Anakin, though he hesitated to admit it.
But without my saber, how can I fight? How can I protect those I care about?
Yoda reached up, placing a gentle hand on Anakin's shoulder.
The Force, not the saber, defines you. Paths beyond the blade you must seek. Trust in it you will. Discover you might. New ways to fight.
Anakin's brow furrowed, his thoughts conflicted. He wanted to believe Yoda's wisdom, but doubt gnawed at him. Without his lightsaber, who was he? Yet deep down, he knew there was truth in Yoda's words.
I know what I need to do, but I don't know do I have the strength to do it.
Anakin muttered, standing and staring at his mechanical hand. Yoda stepped back, his gaze piercing but kind.
Patience you must have. Listen to the Force, and in time, the answers you seek, find them you will.
Anakin stood in silence, contemplating his future. The war raged on, and he knew he had to return to the front lines, but Yoda's words lingered in his mind. Perhaps there was more to being a Jedi than the lightsaber in his hand. As the Masters left the room, Anakin stayed behind, still unsure of his path. But one thing was clear, the Force had not abandoned him. Now, he just had to trust in it. Weeks passed since Anakin's conversation with Yoda. His frustration, though tempered, still lingered beneath the surface. He spent hours in deep meditation, searching for answers in the Force. He yearned for a connection that would help him overcome his struggles and regain the confidence he had lost. One night, as he meditated in solitude, the Force began to ripple around him. Faint whispers echoed in his mind, like distant voices calling from across time. The air around him felt thick, the boundaries between reality and the ethereal growing thin. Anakin's vision blurred, and suddenly he found himself standing in a vast temple hall, one he had never seen before. The hall was filled with figures, Force users, like the Jedi, yet somehow different. Some carried lightsabers, their movements fluid and precise, while others wielded weapons he had never seen. Some of these warriors radiated the energy of the Force, but others, strangely, did not. Yet all of them moved with a grace and strength that mesmerized Anakin. Their prowess in combat was undeniable, and their discipline rivaled that of the Jedi Order. As he observed them, a voice, soft yet commanding, whispered to him,
Seek beyond the Order. Find what has been hidden.
The vision faded, leaving Anakin back in the quiet of the Jedi Temple, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The message was clear. There was more to the Force than what he had learned. There was another path, one that he had to discover for himself. But what was it? Who were these warriors he had seen? Determined, Anakin rushed to the Jedi archives. The vast library held centuries of knowledge, and surely the answer lay within its walls. He spent hours combing through the records, searching for any mention of the group he had seen. But as the minutes ticked by, his frustration grew. The archives were vast, and his search felt like chasing a shadow. After several fruitless hours, Anakin sought out Jocasta Nu, the keeper of the archives. She was a wise and learned Jedi, and if anyone could point him in the right direction, it was her.
Master Nu,
Anakin began, approaching her with urgency.
I've had a vision. A group of warriors, Force users, but not Jedi. They were powerful. I need to know who they are.
Jocasta Nu studied him for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought.
Force users not bound by the Jedi Code, you say? There are legends, tales of the Guardians of the Wills.
She led him to an old, dusty section of the archives, pulling out a faded scroll.
The Guardians of the Wills,
She explained,
are an ancient order. They are worshippers of the Force, but unlike the Jedi, not all of them are sensitive to it. They served as protectors of the Kyber temples on the moon of Jedha, safeguarding the crystals that power lightsabers.
Anakin's heart raced. The moon of Jedha, a place that resonated deeply with the Force and a potential answer to his struggles. Perhaps the Guardians could help him unlock a new understanding of the Force, one that didn't rely on his lightsaber alone. Without hesitation, he made the decision. He would go to Jedha and seek out the Guardians. However, unbeknownst to Anakin, a shadow loomed over his journey. In the far corner of the archives, a figure watched him, discreet and silent. A spy in the service of Palpatine, who had overheard everything. Within moments, the information was relayed back to the Sith Lord. Palpatine smiled darkly when he received the news. He had been waiting for an opportunity to manipulate Anakin further, and the moon of Jedha, with its rich Kyber crystal reserves, was a perfect target. As Anakin prepared to leave on his quest for answers, Palpatine began to weave his own sinister plan, one that would draw Anakin ever closer to the dark side. Anakin stood at the entrance of Jedha City, a vibrant and chaotic mix of bustling traders, dusty streets, and ancient architecture. The sound of distant chatter and haggling filled the air as he walked through the narrow alleyways, clutching his lightsaber hilt tightly at his side. He had hoped this journey would bring him answers, perhaps even a solution to the growing disconnect between himself and the Force, but navigating through the crowded city proved difficult. The language spoken by the locals was unfamiliar, and while they tried to help with his inquiries about the temple, the directions were often lost in translation. Frustrated and slightly disoriented, Anakin continued his search, his eyes scanning the streets for anything that resembled a temple. That was when he bumped into someone.
Watch where you're going!
Anakin snapped, not bothering to hide his irritation. The figure he had collided with turned toward him, a calm expression on his face, but his eyes, pale and unfocused, never met Anakin's.
I would, if I could.
The man said with a slight smirk, his voice steady, betraying no offense. Anakin's expression faltered. He realized instantly the man was blind. Embarrassed, Anakin stepped back, quickly offering an apology.
I'm sorry.
Anakin stammered, taken aback. The man simply nodded.
No harm done, Jedi.
Anakin blinked in surprise.
How do you know I'm a Jedi?
The man's lips curled into a knowing smile.
The Force is strong with you. I can sense it from a mile away, but...
His tone shifted, slightly teasing.
You rely too much on that lightsaber of yours.
Anakin stiffened. He wasn't used to being read so easily, especially by a stranger.
What do you know about it?
He snapped, his frustration bubbling to the surface.
I know that you let it define you.
The man replied.
And in doing so, you've become blind to the greater depths of the Force.
Anakin's anger flared. His connection to his lightsaber had always been a point of pride, and now, with that connection weakening, the last thing he wanted was someone rubbing salt in the wound. Without thinking, he ignited his lightsaber, charging toward the man in a fit of rage. But the stranger was ready. Despite being blind, he moved with grace and precision, easily sidestepping Anakin's attack and redirecting his strikes with nothing more than a staff. No matter how many times Anakin swung, the man deflected each move with minimal effort.
You see?
The man said calmly between strikes.
You're too focused. You're not listening to the Force.
Anakin gritted his teeth, pushing himself harder, but it was no use. He was exhausting himself, and yet the man remained untouched, deflecting every blow with a disarming ease. Finally, Anakin staggered back, breathing heavily, his pride bruised.
Come,
the man said, gesturing for Anakin to follow.
Rest. Fighting me here will get you nowhere.
Reluctantly, Anakin deactivated his lightsaber and followed the man to a quiet, secluded corner of the city. Once there, the man introduced himself.
I am Chirrut Imwe,
he said, bowing slightly.
I serve the Guardians of the Wills.
Anakin's eyes widened.
The Guardians of the Wills? I've come to Jedha seeking answers.
Chirrut nodded.
And answers you may find, but not with your lightsaber.
He twirled his staff casually.
We follow the teachings of the Force, but our combat style, Zamashiro, focuses on feeling the Force, not just wielding it. It's a path that doesn't rely on weapons, but on the connection between body and spirit.
Anakin's interest was piqued, despite himself.
Teach me,
he said, still catching his breath.
I want to learn.
Chirrut smiled, his expression serene.
I will teach you, Anakin Skywalker, but know this. What you seek is not just in combat, it's in understanding the Force beyond what you know.
And so, Anakin's training with Chirrut began, his journey toward rediscovering the Force leading him down an unexpected path, one that would test not only his strength, but his very understanding of what it meant to be a Jedi. Anakin stood in the training grounds of the Temple of Kyber, frustration already bubbling beneath the surface. His fists clenched tightly at his sides as he faced off against Chirrut Imwe, who stood calm and composed, as always. Anakin had spent years perfecting his lightsaber skills, and now he found himself completely out of his element. The hand-to-hand combat techniques, the footwork, the focus on internal strength rather than external, none of it came naturally to him. Chirrut's voice broke through his thoughts.
Are you the master of the saber or the Force?
The taunt stung more than it should have. Anakin gritted his teeth, his pride bruised yet again. He launched another attack, trying to catch Chirrut off guard, but the blind monk deflected his strikes with effortless precision. Each attempt Anakin made only seemed to highlight how far he was from mastering this new style of combat. He had grown too reliant on the lightsaber, on the physicality of it, and now, stripped of that comfort, he felt exposed. With one final, well-timed move, Chirrut swept Anakin off his feet, sending him sprawling onto the ground. Anakin lay there for a moment, his chest heaving as he stared up at the ceiling of the temple. His muscles ached, and his mind raced with frustration and doubt.
Again, you rely too much on what you think you are,
Chirrut said, offering a hand to help him up.
It's not about the saber. It's not about the fight. It's about the Force.
Anakin stood, his jaw clenched in defeat.
Maybe this just isn't for me,
he muttered, turning on his heel to leave the training grounds. Back in his quarters, Anakin threw himself onto his cot, staring up at the ceiling. He felt utterly lost. The more he trained, the further away from the Force he felt, and the more distant the Force became, the angrier he grew. He had come to Jedha seeking answers, hoping to find a way to reconnect with the power that had once flowed through him so effortlessly. But now, all he had was more frustration, more questions, and a growing sense of inadequacy. As Anakin lay there, ready to give up, there was a knock at his door. Chirrut stepped in, his expression soft and patient.
You're only seeing what you lack,
Chirrut said quietly.
You focus on how others perceive you, on what you think you should be. But the Force, it's not about appearances, or even the abilities you have or don't have. It's something deeper.
Anakin's brow furrowed.
What do you mean?
Chirrut tapped the staff on the floor and gestured to his own sightless eyes.
I'm blind, Anakin. I cannot see what others see, but I can feel the Force. It flows through me, not because I need to see it, but because I trust in it. I don't rely on my senses. I rely on the connection that goes beyond them.
Anakin sat up, listening intently now.
In your next sparring session,
Chirrut continued,
stop trying to overcome what you lack. Stop thinking about being a Jedi. Let the Force guide your movements and where you need to be. Trust in it, even when you feel lost.
The next day, Anakin returned to the training grounds, determined to approach things differently. As he squared off against Chirrut again, he focused inward, ignoring the noise of his mind and the weight of his failures. He closed his eyes and let the Force flow through him, concentrating on the way it moved within his body. When Chirrut attacked, Anakin's reflexes responded faster than they had before. He deflected a blow with his arm, spinning out of the way just in time. He didn't think, he felt. The Force guided him. To his surprise, he landed a solid hit on Chirrut's shoulder. Chirrut smiled, bowing slightly.
Better, but you still have much to learn.
Anakin's confidence grew, but he knew Chirrut was right. This was only the beginning of a much longer journey. A journey not just of physical mastery, but of truly understanding the Force in a way he had never done before. Anakin's training on Jedha had been grueling but transformative. Over the course of several months, he learned to connect with the Force in ways he hadn't imagined before. He felt the subtle pull of energy through his body, guiding his movements, and for the first time, his reliance on the lightsaber began to diminish. He had grown stronger, more attuned to the power within him. But one night, as Anakin lay asleep, a dark vision invaded his dreams. The Temple of Kyber was burning, its ancient walls crumbling under the force of an attack. Cloaked figures swept through the temple, plundering its sacred Kyber crystals and leaving nothing but ash and destruction in their wake. Anakin woke with a start, his heart pounding. He sat up in the darkness, trying to shake the terrible image from his mind.
It was just a dream,
he muttered to himself, though he wasn't entirely convinced. The next morning, still troubled by the vision, Anakin approached Chirrut Imwe, hoping the wise monk might offer some insight.
I had a dream.
Anakin began hesitantly, recounting the scene he had witnessed in his sleep.
A vision, maybe. The temple was under attack, burning. They took everything, destroyed everything.
Chirrut listened carefully, his face growing serious.
A dream like this is never just a dream, Anakin. The Force speaks to us in many ways. If you were meant to forget it, you would not have remembered it so vividly.
Anakin frowned, realizing the weight of what Chirrut was saying.
So it's a vision? Something that's going to happen?
Chirrut nodded gravely.
Yes, we must prepare.
Without wasting any time, Chirrut gathered the guardians of the wills, the disciples, and the members of the Church of the Force. Together they convened in the heart of the temple, a solemn assembly as they discussed Anakin's vision. It was clear that if an attack was indeed coming, they needed a plan to protect the Kyber crystals and the sacred temple itself. Anakin also decided to reach out to the Jedi Council for reinforcements, sending a secure message across the galaxy to Coruscant. The Council, however, was in the midst of dealing with the ongoing Clone Wars. When Anakin's transmission arrived, it sparked a debate among the Jedi Masters.
We cannot divert resources from the war effort,
Mace Windu stated firmly.
especially not for something as uncertain as a vision.
The war is our priority.
Ki-Adi-Mundi agreed.
If we lose focus, we risk leaving the Republic vulnerable.
But Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin's former master, felt a deep unease as he listened. He knew Anakin too well to dismiss this as mere paranoia or recklessness. The young Jedi had always had strong instincts, and Obi-Wan couldn't shake the feeling that this situation was more serious than the others realized.
Master Yoda,
Obi-Wan said quietly after the council meeting had adjourned,
I believe Anakin may be right. If he's asking for help, it could be critical. Should I go to Jedha to investigate?
Yoda, with his wisdom and foresight, nodded.
Trust in your feelings you must. Sense truth in his words. I do. If your heart leads you there, follow it. You should.
As Obi-Wan prepared to leave the council chambers, he was interrupted by none other than Chancellor Palpatine, who appeared unusually concerned.
Master Kenobi,
Palpatine said smoothly,
I've been wondering about Anakin. It's been some time since I've seen him. He's like a son to me, you know. I've missed his presence. Tell me, is he safe?
Obi-Wan, caught off guard by the Chancellor's sudden interest, assured him that Anakin was fine.
I received a message from him just this morning. He's on Jedha, dealing with something important.
Palpatine's eyes gleamed with interest.
Jedha, you say? That's a fascinating place, rich with history and kyber crystals, if I'm not mistaken. You must go to him, Master Kenobi. He needs your support. In fact, why not lead some clone troopers there? I can grant you the authority to take them, and I could join you, to offer my support to Anakin in person.
Obi-Wan hesitated. Something about the Chancellor's offer didn't sit right with him, though he couldn't quite place why.
I will consider it,
he said carefully. Palpatine smiled, feigning innocence.
Of course. I don't claim to understand the ways of the Force. But if Anakin is in danger, shouldn't we do everything we can to help him?
Obi-Wan gave a respectful nod, but as Palpatine turned to leave, the unease gnawed at him. He couldn't ignore the feeling that something larger was at play. Nevertheless, he resolved to follow his instincts and head to Jedha, though he now wondered what role Palpatine might play in the events to come. Days had passed since the temple's defenses were bolstered. The Guardians of the Wills doubled their efforts, Chirrut and Anakin standing at the helm of the effort. Anakin had embraced the role, donning the Guardian's uniform, a new look that reminded him of how far he'd come. He stretched his arm and felt a small hum of mechanical whirring, suddenly reminded that his right arm was still a prosthetic. For the first time in a while he smiled, proud of his progress. However, his doubts lingered. He glanced down at his lightsaber, tucked away in his bag since the day he arrived on Jedha. With a flick of his wrist, he ignited it, the familiar hum resonating through the air. He swung it a few times, but something still felt off. The connection he once had with his weapon, with the Force through it, was still elusive. A wave of disappointment washed over him. Doubt is a path to failure, Anakin thought. He worried if he was truly ready to defend the temple when the time came. Could he really protect Jedha? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. A guardian stood in the entrance, bowing slightly.
A ship has landed near the city, and they're calling for you.
Anakin stepped to the window and his heart leapt. He recognized the ship immediately. It was Obi-Wan's. But standing next to him, descending the ramp, was an even more unexpected figure, Chancellor Palpatine. Anakin rushed to meet them, his doubts momentarily forgotten.
Obi-Wan,
He called, a smile spreading across his face.
it's good to see you.
Obi-Wan returned the smile, clasping his former apprentice's shoulder.
You've grown, Anakin. I hardly recognized you in that uniform.
Anakin chuckled, glancing down at his new attire.
You think it suits me?
They shared a brief banter, the easy camaraderie that had always existed between them still present, despite everything. Anakin then turned to the Chancellor, bowing slightly.
Chancellor, it's an honor to have you here.
Palpatine smiled warmly, his presence commanding yet reassuring.
The honor is mine, Anakin. I've heard much of your progress on Jedha. I had to see it for myself.
The 501st Legion stood at attention behind them, a welcome sight. Anakin led both Obi-Wan and Palpatine to the temple, explaining the situation as they entered. The vision, the temple's defenses, the plan to protect the kyber crystals. Obi-Wan listened intently, nodding in agreement with the strategy. However, as the meeting concluded, Palpatine requested to speak to Anakin alone. Obi-Wan hesitated, but eventually agreed, leaving them in the dimly lit halls of the temple. Palpatine's voice dropped to a low, consoling tone as he approached Anakin.
I'm truly sorry for your suffering, my boy. Losing a limb is no small matter. I wish I could have done something to prevent it.
Anakin nodded.
It's been hard, but I've adapted.
The Chancellor stepped closer, his voice now more conspiratorial.
Still, I sense your frustration. Your connection to your lightsaber, your once great mastery over the Force. It's not what it was, is it?
Anakin's brow furrowed, unsure of where this was leading.
No, it's not. But I'm working on it.
Palpatine's eyes gleamed.
There are other ways, Anakin. Ways that the Jedi won't tell you. The dark side of the Force is a pathway to power. Power that can restore you to your full strength and beyond. Think about what you could achieve. What you could become.
A chill ran down Anakin's spine. Palpatine's words stirred something deep inside him, and suddenly, without warning, the vision returned. He saw it clearly now, himself, cloaked in darkness, destroying the temple, leading the attack, and guiding him through it all was Palpatine. With a gasp, Anakin snapped out of the vision, stepping back in horror.
You're the Sith Lord!
He breathed, the realization crashing down on him.
You're the one who's been orchestrating all of this.
Palpatine's warm facade crumbled, replaced by cold, malevolent certainty.
Yes, Anakin, and you will help me secure these Kyber crystals to build the ultimate weapon, the Death Star. Together, we will rule the galaxy, and you will exceed your wildest potential.
He handed Anakin his lightsaber, the dark temptation hanging in the air.
Remember what you truly desire. Power, strength, glory.
Anakin stared at the weapon for a long moment, his mind racing, but in the end, he knew what was right. With a firm grip, he handed the saber back to Palpatine.
No, I won't do it.
Palpatine's face twisted in fury.
So be it.
He turned and barked an order to the soldiers waiting outside.
Attack the temple! Leave no one alive!
The sound of blaster fire erupted outside as the assault on the Temple of Kyber began. Anakin stood his ground, his heart heavy with the realization of the battle that lay ahead. The battle erupted with chaos as the Guardians of the Wills clashed with the elite clones of the 501st Legion. The Guardians fought valiantly, their skill in martial arts and their spiritual connection to the Force giving them an edge, but the clones' superior technology and numbers quickly overwhelmed them. Blaster fire filled the air, and one by one, Guardians were being cut down. Chirrut Imwe, however, remained a beacon of hope. Despite his blindness, he moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, weaving between blaster bolts, deflecting them with his staff, and disarming clones with graceful precision. He led a group of Guardians to safety, directing them away from the brunt of the fighting, all while effortlessly taking down his enemies. The Force guided his every step. Obi-Wan Kenobi, caught in the chaos, was bewildered. Why were the clones attacking? They were supposed to be allies, but there was no time to ponder as the fighting intensified. He fought alongside Chirrut, lightsaber flashing as he deflected blaster fire, cutting down clone after clone. But even with his skills and Chirrut's aid, they were struggling to hold the line. Then, out of the smoke, Anakin appeared. His presence was a whirlwind of energy. No longer the uncertain Jedi, he dove into the fray with confidence, his body moving in a blur of motion. Anakin's mastery of martial arts was on full display, and though his lightsaber was still missing, his fists, feet, and raw connection to the Force were enough. He tore through the ranks of the clones, his movements fluid and devastating, leaving a trail of fallen soldiers in his wake. Chirrut, sensing Anakin's arrival despite his blindness, smiled faintly. "It's good to have you here, my friend." Together, Anakin, Chirrut, and Obi-Wan held off the advancing clones, their combined strength turning the tide of the battle. For a moment, it seemed they might be able to push the attackers back. But then, everything changed. From the shadows emerged Palpatine, his dark cloak billowing around him like a storm cloud. He stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with malice.
Anakin,
he called out, his voice dripping with mockery.
Look at you, a mere shadow of what you could have been. You had the potential to become the greatest of all Jedi, yet here you are, an empty shell, too weak to overcome such trivialities.
Palpatine's taunt struck a nerve deep within Anakin. Rage flared in his heart, and without thinking, he charged at the Sith Lord. But Palpatine was prepared. With a cruel smile, He raised his hands and unleashed a torrent of Force lightning. The bolts of energy crackled through the air, striking Anakin and sending him crashing to the ground. He screamed in agony as the electricity coursed through his body. Obi-Wan and Chirrut leapt to Anakin's aid, but Palpatine easily deflected their attacks, sending them flying into the temple walls with a wave of his hand.
Fools.
He sneered, his voice filled with contempt.
The Jedi, the Guardians of the Wills, all of you are weak. You've made Anakin weak.
Anakin writhed on the ground, his body burning with pain, his mind clouded with anger and despair. He could hear Palpatine's voice echoing in his ears, taunting him, calling him a failure. In his desperation, he began to mutter under his breath, the words coming to him from somewhere deep within.
I am one with the Force. The Force is with me. I am one with the Force. The Force is with me.
Suddenly, Anakin's lightsaber, still in his quarters, sprang to life. It flew through the temple, racing toward its master, but just as it reached him, Palpatine intercepted it, catching the hilt in midair. With a sneer, he crushed the lightsaber in his hand, reducing it to a pile of broken metal and sparking wires.
You are not worthy of this,
Palpatine hissed. Anakin looked on in devastation as Palpatine continued to torment Obi-Wan and Chirrut. He could feel the dark side pulling at him, offering him power, power to stop Palpatine, power to save his friends. The temptation was overwhelming, but as the darkness surged within him, something held him back.
I am one with the Force.
He whispered again, louder this time, as if trying to ground himself in the light. Palpatine laughed, sensing Anakin's internal struggle.
Yes. Let the darkness in, Anakin. It is the only way to defeat me. Embrace your true power.
But then, something extraordinary happened. Obi-Wan, still struggling to his feet, placed a hand on Anakin's shoulder. Chirrut, despite his injuries, whispered the same words Anakin had been muttering.
The Force is with you, Anakin.
Grounded by their support, Anakin felt clarity returning. He stood, the dark side's pull weakening, and with a sudden surge of strength, he unleashed a powerful blast of Force energy that sent Palpatine stumbling back. Together, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Chirrut stood united, their combined might overwhelming the Sith Lord. Palpatine, realizing his plan had failed, snarled in frustration as he was overpowered. Bound by the Force, he was finally captured, and Anakin stood tall, knowing he had faced the darkness and won. In the aftermath of Palpatine's defeat, the Jedi and the Guardians of the Wills stood side by side, victorious but deeply reflective. The battle had taken a toll on both groups, but it also revealed the strength of their unity. As Palpatine was escorted away, bound by the Force, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Chirrut knew they had prevented a catastrophe that could have doomed the galaxy. Recognizing the value of their combined skills, the Jedi Council made a historic decision. They proposed a formal alliance with the Guardians of the Wills, integrating the spiritual teachings and martial skills of the Guardians into Jedi training. The Guardians' mastery of hand-to-hand combat, combined with their deep connection to the Force, proved to be a powerful asset that the Jedi Order could no longer ignore. The temple on Jedha became a shared base of operations, where Jedi and Guardians trained together. Every Jedi was now required to learn hand-to-hand combat, enhancing their combat effectiveness when their lightsabers were unavailable. Anakin, now more at peace with himself and his place in the Force, became one of the key figures in this new training regime. His experience with martial arts, combined with his natural prowess in the Force, made him the perfect bridge between the two groups. Under this new partnership, the Jedi and the Guardians of the Wills formed a military powerhouse, capable of defending the galaxy from any threat. Their combined forces were not only skilled in lightsaber combat, but also in unarmed fighting, making them more versatile and formidable than ever before. This union also served as a symbol of hope and unity, showing that even in times of great division, different groups could come together for a common cause. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Chirrut stood together at the temple's edge, watching as their students sparred and trained.
The future is brighter now.
Obi-Wan said, placing a hand on Anakin's shoulder. Anakin nodded, finally feeling at peace, knowing that he had not only defended the temple, but had also found a way to balance the light and darkness within himself. And so, the Jedi and Guardians moved forward, united in strength and purpose, ready to protect the galaxy from whatever darkness might arise next.